close your eyes for a moment. And picture this. You're sitting in a narrow wooden canoe, drifting slowly across a lake so still, it looks like glass. The sun hasn't risen yet. The sky is soft and gray, like a dream that hasn't fully formed. Then mist floats just above the water. The air is cool, damp, and filled with the faint scent of roasted maize coming from somewhere far off. All around you float gardens. Not planted in soil, but floating, gently rocking with the rhythm of the lake. These gardens, woven from reeds, branches, and lake mud, aren't just clever inventions. They're sacred. They're offerings. They're how an entire city survived in the middle of a lake, without land. And tonight you're going to drift right into the heart of them. Have you ever heard of a floating farm? Not a raft with plants, not a modern hydroponic project. I mean ancient gardens, built by hand, held together by roots and ritual. To feed an empire and to honor the gods. In the next few hours I'll take you through how the Aztecs turned swampy water into a miracle of agriculture. Why their gardens weren't just for food, but for prayers, power, and peace. And how these ancient innovations may still hold lessons for us, in a world that's changing faster than ever. But don't worry. You don't need to take notes. This is a story told slowly, like a boat sliding through lily pads. No stress. No shouting. Just quiet wonder. If you stay with me until the end, you'll not only understand what a chinampa is, you'll feel what it was like to live on one. To wake with the sun, to plant with the moon, and to believe that every harvest was a gift from the sky. So now, let me ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because I know this one thing about everyone who listens to my stories. You, me, and thousands of others, we all love to fall asleep. To a voice that drifts like water, telling stories from a world long gone. Let's begin where the story truly starts. Long before concrete highways and electric lights. Before New York or Paris, even before the Spanish ever crossed the ocean. There was a city that shimmered on water. Its name? Tenochtitlan. To the first European eyes that saw it, it looked like something from a myth. Temples rising from the center of a lake. Stone walkways stretching like arms across the water. And between them, gardens that floated, breathed, and bloomed. But this wasn't magic. This was engineering, Aztec style. And it all began with a prophecy. According to legend, the Aztecs were once wanderers. Nomads searching for a sign from the gods. They were told, when you see an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake, that is where you must build your home. And one morning, on a tiny island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, they saw it. An eagle. A cactus. A snake. They didn't question it. They didn't hesitate. Right there, in a place with no farmland, no pastures, no dry ground. They built their empire. But how do you farm, on water? How do you feed thousands, when the earth beneath you is mud and reeds? This is where the story of the chinampa begins. A chinampa is often described as a floating garden, but that's not quite right. It doesn't float like a boat. It's anchored, carefully, lovingly, into the shallow beds of the lake. Built layer by layer, like a lasagna of nature. Mud, reeds, willow branches, more mud, more plants, until it grows strong enough to hold a farmer, a child, even a small house. From a distance, it looks like a patch of land. But when you get closer you realize, this land is alive. It moves. It breathes. And it's completely surrounded by water. Early in the morning, before the sun rises fully, the gardeners arrive. Barefoot. Quiet. Focused. They kneel. They touch the soil, not with tools first, but with their fingers. They speak a prayer. Not always out loud, but always in their hearts. They thank Tlaloc, the god of rain. They thank Chicumcodal, goddess of maize. They whisper to the lake. Because in their world, the lake listens. Then, and only then, they plant. These were not just farmers. They were caretakers of a sacred system. Men, women, children, each knowing that what they grew was not just for their bodies, but for the gods. And what they planted, era of corn maize, hot pepper chilies, tomatoes, herb amaranth, cherry blossom marigolds, each with a story, each with a psalm. And so the days passed. Sunlight shimmered, canoes glided, seeds sprouted, the water stayed close, the gods even closer. Somewhere in the distance, a drum would echo from the temple, not to alarm, but to remind. Today is sacred. Plant like the gods are watching, because in Tenochtitlan they believed the gods always were. Imagine for a moment that you are one of them. You are young, perhaps 16 or 17. The air is cool on your face, but the sun is rising slowly behind the volcanoes, painting streaks of orange and gold across the lake. You've lived your whole life on water. Your house stands on stilts. Your bed is woven from reeds. And outside your door, your family's chinampa waits, green and breathing. Your canoe is small. You push off with one gentle stroke and drift through the mist. The birds are already awake. You see an egret stalking the shallow edge. You hear the call of a duck, the splash of something unseen beneath the surface. But mostly, it's quiet. A peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that lets you hear your own breath. The kind that makes time move slower. You reach the edge of the chinampa. It's long and narrow, bordered by rows of willow trees. Their roots hold the garden in place, like anchors in the lake bed. The surface is soft, rich with compost of mud, ash, and old plants. You kneel, press your palms into the soil. Still warm from yesterday's sun, still damp from last night's dew. You begin your work. You start with maize. Always maize. The people call it sinli. It's not just food. It's identity. It's life itself. You make small holes with your finger and drop in 3 seeds. One for the body, one for the mind, one for the spirit. That's what your grandmother taught you. Next comes beans. They'll climb the maize stalks like vines searching for the sky. And squash, planted low, will spread wide leaves to shade the roots. This trio, you were told, are the 3 sisters. They grow best when they grow together. Just like people. Hours pass. You hum to yourself, an old song. Something your father sang while planting. You don't remember the words. Just the rhythm. It keeps your hands moving. Like a tide that comes in with every note. By midday, the sun is strong. You sit beneath the willow. Pull out a small woven pouch. Inside, roasted maize, dried chili, and a sweet fruit wrapped in a corn husk. It's not much, but it tastes like the lake, like home, like enough. You eat slowly, not just because you're tired, but because in your world, meals are sacred. Every bite is a thank you to the gods. Every swallow, a quiet prayer. Afternoon light turns golden. You return to the garden, this time just to tend. You check for pests, none today. You water with lake buckets, cold on your feet. You sing softly, so the plants know they're not alone. And finally, you sit. Just sit. Breathe. Listen. You watch the clouds reflect on the water. You watch dragonflies chase one another in the reeds. And for a long while, you do nothing. Because sometimes, nothing is what the garden needs. As the sun sinks low, you pack your tools. One last look at the chinampa. Green rose still imperfect. Everything in place. Everything at peace. You paddle home, slow and silent. The lake glows pink. The city ahead, Tenochtitlan, rises like a dream. Your family waits with food. Your body aches in the best kind of way. Tomorrow, you'll return. But for now, you sleep. Before the Aztecs rose, before Tenochtitlan shimmered like a jewel on the lake, there were others. Older peoples, older hands, older stories nearly forgotten, but whispered still, through the ripples of Lake Texcoco. Historians call them the Zakamilka, a people of water, reeds, and silence. They lived long before the empire, They didn't build pyramids. They built life, one floating plot at a time. Imagine their challenge. Marshes everywhere. No flat land. No room to plant. And yet, they saw opportunity, not obstacle. They didn't fight the lake. They worked with it. Talked to it. And from those muddy, uncertain waters, they built the first chinampas. Not with stone or brick, but with patience. It began with simple things. Sheaf of rice reeds cut and bundled. Herb water lilies laid across. Twigs and logs stacked gently on top. Mud, thick and dark, hauled from the lake bed in woven baskets. Layer upon layer. Like baking a sacred cake for the gods. Then came the saplings. Willow and cypress, planted at the corners. Their roots diving down. Finding purchase in the unseen world beneath the water. Within weeks, the island held. And within months, it bloomed. These first floating plots didn't look like much. They swayed. They creaked. They smelled a little earthy. But they grew food. And more importantly, they grew trust. Trust between people and nature. Trust that, even in the middle of a swamp, life could take root. Over time, the system grew smarter. Irrigation canals were dug between the islands, so narrow canoes could pass. Raised walkways were added, so feet stayed dry in rainy seasons. Even compost, yes, compost, was used. Leftover stalks, crushed shells, fish bones, and charcoal. Nothing was wasted, because in this world, everything had purpose, even what others threw away. The chinampa wasn't just a field. It was a memory, a living memory of cooperation. Layered into mud, every new garden was built beside the old. Families passed them down, and over generations, the lake became a patchwork of green rafts, each with its own heartbeat. Some of those ancient chinampas still exist, still floating, still growing. Even today, if you travel south of Mexico City to a place called Xochimilco, you can ride a brightly colored boat through those same canals and see the descendants of that first garden, still anchored, still alive. And if you listen closely, beneath the hum of tourists, beneath the sound of water lapping against paint, you might still hear it. The soft, steady breath of a system the earth never forgot. Now close your eyes again, if they aren't already. Picture this. A narrow canoe slides between two green rows. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and sweet marigolds. It's just before sunrise. The sky is still dim, but the lake glows softly, as if holding a secret. In the boat sits a man, middle-aged, calm. His face is lined by sun, time, and quiet joy. Beside him, a child, not more than 9 years old, eyes wide, hands still. Today, the man will teach, not from books, not with lectures, but with soil. The chinampa is already waiting, freshly swept, freshly watered. At one end, incense burns. Copal smoke rises into the morning breeze. Not for show, for spirit. We never plant alone, the man says. Even when it's just us, the gods are watching. First, the offering. The man opens a bundle wrapped in palm leaves. Inside, cornmeal, crushed flowers, a few drops of pulque, a fermented drink made from agave. He sprinkles them at the edge of the garden, murmuring words the child doesn't fully understand, but feels. It's not superstition, it's connection. To the lake, to the ancestors, to every hand that's ever worked this soil. Next, the seeds, not dropped carelessly, but placed, gently, into tiny holes poked by thumb. 3 seeds of maize, 2 beans, 1 squash. Always in that order. Together, they protect each other, the man explains. The maize stands tall. The beans climb high. The squash shades the earth. Even the plants are a family. The child watches, then mimics, fingers pressing seeds into soil that feels cool and soft, like old memory. No one rushes. No one talks much. Only the sound of water lapping, and birds singing in the trees above. Planting isn't work here. It's rhythm. A morning prayer in motion. Then comes the song. The man hums softly. A melody passed down from his mother and her mother. The words are simple. May you grow tall. May you feed well. May your roots go deep. The child joins in, uncertain at first. But by the second verse, they're in harmony. Not just with each other, but with the garden itself. Because in the chinampa, everything is sacred. The seeds, the soil, the silence. Even the weeds are pulled with care. Because they, too, are part of the story. No chemicals. No steel tools. Only hands. Only breath. And when the sun finally climbs over the edge of the lake, the garden glows gold. Rows of green shimmer like wet paint. Dragonflies dance between the leaves. And for one quiet moment, everything is still. Balanced. Beautiful. Blessed. If you've ever walked through a garden at dusk, with the air still warm, and the sky just beginning to turn lavender, you know the feeling. That quiet sense. That something bigger is watching. Something ancient. Something gentle. The Aztecs believed this too. Not just in moments, but in the very design of their world. To them, the chinampa wasn't just a place to grow food. It was a mirror, a reflection of what they believed existed above. Milky Way, a heavenly garden. Blossom, perfect rows of divine flowers. Droplet, sacred water flowing between celestial islands. They called it Talokan, the paradise of the rain god Tlaloc, a place of eternal spring, where crops never failed, and no one ever hungered. It was said that those who died from lightning, or drowned, or sacrificed their lives to water, would go to Talokan. There they would live among floating gardens in the sky, planting joy, harvesting peace. No pain, no war, just slow mornings, and sunlight that never burned. So when a gardener stepped onto their chinampa each day, they weren't just doing labor, they were rehearsing heaven. Their rows of maize became pathways for spirits. Their flowers became offerings to the gods. Even the humble act of weeding became an act of reverence, because every gesture on earth had a reflection above. The layout of the city, Tenochtitlan itself, was designed with this in mind. Temples rose in the center. Just as the sun rises at the height of the sky, the canals formed sacred shapes, echoing the movements of stars. And the floating farms? They rippled outward like cosmic waves, reminding the people every day that they were living inside a story the gods themselves had written. Priests believed that balance on earth kept balance in the heavens. If the gardens were tended with love, the rains would come in season, the sun would rise gently, the winds would stay calm. But if the people neglected the land, let weeds overrun, wasted food, forgot the old songs, then the gods might weep, or worse, go silent. To prevent this, entire festivals were held in honor of the fields. One of the most beautiful was called Huitozatli, the great planting ceremony. It marked the start of the maize season, and during this festival, children carried bundles of young corn stalks through the city. Dancers wore costumes made of husks and petals. Priests poured water from clay pots, whispering blessings. And in every chinampa, the farmers would pause for one moment, hands still muddy, breath still short, and look up, to the sky, to the lake, to the memory of gods planting stars in the heavens. Because when you worked the chinampa, you weren't just growing food, you were keeping the world in balance. Not with power, not with fire, but with kindness, with rhythm, with soil, with care. Let's drift once more. Not down a canal this time, but into the heart of the city. It's just past sunrise in Tenochtitlan. The sky is still peach-colored, the lake catching every hue, and the air hums softly, with the promise of a new day. Today is a market day, and that means canoes are arriving. You hear them before you see them. Wooden hulls brushing against the docks. The soft splash of paddles. Whispers of greetings. And then, the colors. Bright red chilies piled like embers. Golden marigolds folded into reeds. Dark green herbs tied with reeds. Purple beans stacked like small gems. All of it planted just days before on chinampas. Now, ready to nourish the city. The market is called Tyne Quisley. It is vast, sprawling across open courtyards and covered spaces. Organized with a kind of graceful chaos. No shouting, no haggling, only soft conversation. Exchanges of food, cloth, song, and thanks. People come from every part of the city. Gardeners from the south. Fishermen from the lake's edge. Mothers holding baskets. Children carrying small coins. Priests selecting flowers for altars. There are no scales. No paper money. But everything has value. A bundle of squash might be traded for woven cloth. A canoe full of maize for obsidian blades. A garland of fresh herbs for stories. Shared over tamales and laughter. Time slows here. No one is in a rush. Because the market is not just a place to buy. It is a place to be. In the corner, a musician plays a clay flute. The sound is high and soft, like wind through reeds. Nearby, a boy offers cups of cacao, frothy and spiced with chili. Not everyone can afford it. But today, he smiles and gives it freely to an elder. And the elder, in return, blesses his basket of beans. The flowers are everywhere, fresh from chinampas. They're laid in baskets, pinned in hair, tied to staffs, sewn into cloaks. Some will be eaten, some burned in ritual, some offered to gods, or left at the doorstep of someone missed. The marigold, especially, glows with an orange so deep. It looks like fire made gentle. This, too, is the work of the garden. Not just survival, not just calories, but culture, color, community. The chinampa is quiet, but its gifts speak loudly here. By noon, the market swells. Fragrance fills the air. Roasted maize, steaming tamales, grilled squash. Music continues. Laughter grows. The city breathes together. All fed by the floating gardens. All connected by the rhythm of planting, harvesting, sharing. And then, as the sun reaches its peak, the canoes begin to return. Empty baskets. Full hearts. Back down the canals. Back to the chinampas, where seeds will be planted again. And the cycle, soft, sacred, would begin once more. There's something about gentle repetition. The planting, the watering, the tending, that softens the mind. It slows the breath. It calms the hands. It invites stories. And in the world of the Aztecs, the chinampa was not only a place to work, it was a place to dream. Every generation, the floating gardens carry not just vegetables and herbs, but songs, lullabies whispered across the water, poems told beneath the willow trees, stories passed down like seeds, from mother to daughter, from grandfather to grandson, stories that held the laughter of ancestors, the warnings of old gods, the gentle wisdom of the soil. At night, when the canoes were tied, and the stars flickered over the lake like scattered maize kernels, families would gather on their rafts or in stilted homes. The air was cooler. The frogs sang. And someone, always someone, would begin to speak. Long ago, they would say, before even the chinampa knew how to float. And the story would begin. One tale told of a garden that grew so wide, it touched the sky. The gods walked through its rows. They chose flowers to turn into people. And when they grew tired, they rested beneath squash leaves as large as temple roofs. Another told of a woman, born from a single maize seed. who sang her children into the world, and whose laughter made the rains come early. Some stories were simple, some were sad. Many ended with the same soft truth. To plant is to remember, to harvest is to honor, to care is to live. The children would fall asleep to the sound of these stories, their dreams carried across the water, like petals on wind. And in the morning, they would wake to birdsong, to mist, to the smell of fresh earth. The garden was still there, always waiting, always alive. Even the names of the plants held poetry. Maize wasn't just corn, it was tlali, that which sustains. Beans were called etl, linked to endurance and warmth. Chili peppers? Chili, named not for fire, but for balance. Heat that awakens, not burns. The old farmers believed that gardens listened, not to words, but to intention. If you were kind to the soil, it remembered. If you sang to the seeds, they sprouted stronger. If you loved the garden, it loved you back. Even now, in modern times, in the corners of Xochimilco, where some chinampas still survive, old songs are sometimes heard, not loud, not staged, but hummed softly, as hands press into the same dark soil that fed emperors, musicians, poets, and priests. Because long after the empire fell, and the temples crumbled, and the conquerors renamed the land, the chinampas remembered. They remembered the footsteps, the laughter, the prayers, and in that quiet memory, the Aztec spirit still floats, like a boat without oars, gliding endlessly across the past. We often think of ancient life as all labor, waking with the sun, working until dusk, never stopping. But the Aztecs knew better. They understood something we so often forget. Life is not just about motion, it is also about stillness. Even in the chinampas, with rows to tend and seeds to sow, there were moments made only for rest. Not because nothing needed doing, but because the soul, like the soil, needs time to breathe. Imagine a warm afternoon on the chinampa. The air is heavy. The lake reflects the clouds like a giant mirror. The work is done for now. A gardener sits beneath a willow tree. No tools in hand. No task before him. He simply sits. He watches a heron wade through shallow water. He listens to insects clicking softly in the reeds. He smells the damp earth and faint sweetness of marigolds. He is not wasting time. He is feeding something deeper. The old ones used to say, if you never rest your hand, your spirit will forget how to hold. In Aztec farming life, rest was an absence. It was presence of another kind. It was time to reflect, to give thanks, to reconnect with the world inside. There were even rituals of stillness. At certain times of year, between planting and harvest, families would set aside entire days to sit quietly beside their gardens. No talking, no work, just sitting, breathing, remembering. Children were taught this from a young age. Sit with the land, their elders would say. Let it tell you something. Sometimes they would hear only silence. Other times, they might notice a vine curling just a little further today, a bird returning to the same branch, a breeze that carried the scent of new blossoms. And in those small things, the child would learn patience and peace. At night, too, the chinampas were quiet. No lanterns, no fires, only the glow of stars, the sound of crickets, and the occasional splash of something unseen. For the Aztecs, night wasn't just for sleeping. It was for listening to the gods. They believed dreams were messages. That sleep was a sacred threshold between this world and others. So before bed, some families would sprinkle a few drops of lake water around their door, a way to invite calm, a way to remind the spirits. We are here. We are quiet. We are ready to dream. Even in the temples, priests observed days of silence. Entire ceremonies might be held, with no words, only smoke, flowers, movement, and breath. Because silence, they believed, was the sound of truth arriving. Perhaps that is what made the chinampa world so beautiful. Not just its ability to feed, but its ability to hold space. For reflection, for gratitude, for the kind of peace that doesn't shout. It simply waits. So if you ever find yourself tired, not just in body, but in spirit, remember the old gardener, resting under the willow, nothing to do, nowhere to go, and yet, completely connected to everything around him. Though the chinampas were often places of stillness. There were days, bright, golden days, when the lake stirred with laughter, when music floated down the canals, and the gardens bloomed not only with crocs, but with color, sound, and sacred celebration. These were the festival days. And in the world of the Aztecs, they were not rare. The Aztec calendar was filled with ceremonies, dozens each year, each marking a moment in the cycle of life, the shifting of seasons, or the honor of a god. Some were held in grand temples, others began right there, in the chinampas. Imagine it. The sun has barely risen, but already the boats are gathering. Men and women wear cloaks embroidered with feathers. Children have flowers tucked behind their ears. Priests ride at the front, holding bundles of incense and painted gourds. And the gardens, usually quiet and practical, are now draped with garlands. Red, yellow, orange, colors meant to wake the gods. One of the most beautiful festivals was called Huitozatli, a celebration of maize. It marked the beginning of the planting season, a time to ask for rain, a time to thank the gods for last year's harvest. In the chinampas, families would build small altars, made of reeds and clay. They placed there the first ears of last year's corn, small bowls of cacao and beans, threads dyed in blue and green, the colors of growth and water. Flute players stood on the banks, sending melodies into the mist. Dancers moved slowly between rows of squash and chilies, their feet bare, their steps deliberate, softening the earth as they honored it. No one shouted, no one hurried. Even in joy, there was calm. Even in celebration, there was care. During the festival, farmers refrained from using sharp tools. Instead, they dug with sticks or their bare hands, as a way of showing gentleness to the earth. Children were invited to press seeds into the soil, with songs sung softly in the old language. Little one, grow. The gods are watching. You are the hope in the root. And then came the floating offerings. Families loaded small boats with flowers, fruit, and burning incense. They paddled them slowly along the canal's edge, leaving trails of petals behind. At a certain bend in the water, where the wind was said to always pause, they released the offerings to drift alone. Some said the gods met them there. Others said the lake itself was the messenger. Either way, no offering went unseen. As evening fell, the light turned golden. Lanterns, made from gourds, were hung from tree branches. They swayed gently in the breeze, casting flickers of flame across the water. Songs continued, not loud, not sharp, but like lullabies for the land. The chinampas glowed, and as night took over, families returned home. The gardens were left in peace, covered in marigold petals, perfumed with sweet smoke, blessed by the steps of dancers. And in the silence that followed, you could almost hear it. The soil sighing, the seeds listening, the gods smiling. The Aztecs did not build schools beside their gardens. There were no chalkboards, no scrolls, no libraries lined with shelves. Instead, they learned by doing, and by listening, because in the chinampas, every row of maize, every reed fence, every paddle stroke down the canal, was a lesson waiting to be passed on. Knowledge came slowly, not all at once, not in the way a bell rings, but like a sunrise, soft, steady, sure. It began with watching, A child would sit on the edge of the boat, legs dangling just above the water, eyes wide as their grandfather worked the field. No commands, no lectures, only gestures. The way he checked the weight of the soil in his hand, the way he bent to examine a bean vine, or touched the underside of a squash leaf, or paused to listen to the wind before watering, all of it was teaching. And then, slowly, the child would be invited in, first to carry the basket, then to gather herbs, one day to plant, always one small task at a time, always with quiet guidance, a hand over theirs, a nod, a smile, a whisper. Yes, like that. The stakes were not punished. They were corrected with calm and remembered with care, because the garden had its own way of teaching. Too much water, the roots would sag. Not enough sun, the leaves would fade. The child would learn, not from scolding, but from noticing. Stories helped too. Tales were told while weeding, during canoe rides, or beside cooking fires at dusk. Each one held a lesson, woven into myth, wrapped in wonder, like the story of the boy who planted too early, and whose corn grew so tall, it shaded the whole village, until the gods taught him patience by hiding the rain, or the tale of the girl who whispered her troubles to the garden, and found squash blossoms blooming in her footsteps the next morning. These stories weren't written, they were remembered, and spoken aloud, so they could be planted like seeds in the minds of the young, because once something is spoken with love, it finds a way to grow. By the time a child reached adulthood, they didn't just know how to plant, they knew when to wait, how to watch, how to breathe with the land. They had been shaped not only by instruction, but by the rhythm of their ancestors. Every act, sowing, watering, harvesting, was not just skill, it was inheritance. And so the knowledge lived on, from voice to voice, from hand to hand, from one soul to the next. It did not need paper, it needed presence. And in the quiet spaces between tasks, in the hush of the garden, that knowledge was always waiting, like a tool left in its place, like a path remembered in bare feet. The lake was always there, before the gardens, before the city, before the first canoe was carved from a tree. There was water, and in that water was wisdom. The Aztecs didn't just live near the lake, they lived with it. They listened to it. They learned from it. Because the lake, Lake Texcoco, was more than geography. It was a presence. It taught stillness. When the wind paused, and the water turned to glass, reflecting the clouds like a painted ceiling, people knew it was time to listen. No shouting, no movement, only breath. The lake reminded them that not every moment needs to be filled. Some moments are meant to be held, like water cupped gently in your hands. It taught patience. The water rose when it wanted to. It flooded when it had to. No warnings, no bargaining. A field that bloomed yesterday might vanish under water today. But the people didn't curse. They adapted. They moved the stakes, rebuilt the beds, started again, because the lake had its own rhythm. And fighting it was like shouting into the wind. It taught respect. You couldn't throw just anything into its waters. Old offerings were placed carefully, wrapped in leaves, spoken to, blessed. Fishermen whispered prayers before casting their nets. Children were told, if you take from the lake, bow your head. If you fall in, greet her softly. If you dream by her edge, she might show you something. The lake had moods. Some days clear and calm, others cloudy and choppy, but always alive. Birds skimmed across its surface. Turtles surfaced near the reeds. Lotus flowers opened with the sun. And beneath it all, roots, currents, history. Stories sank into that water, layer by layer, generation by generation. The lake gave freely. sheaf of rice water for the chinampas, herb mud for the soil, fish and frogs for the table, canoe a highway for the people. But she could also take. She swallowed boats during storms. She crept into homes during floods. She held secrets in her depths, things long forgotten, but never truly gone. When people died, ashes were sometimes scattered on the lake, not out of sorrow, but with serenity, because returning to the water meant returning to the source, to float again, to reflect again, to teach again. Even now, when the sun sets over what remains of Lake Texcoco, the water shimmers like memory, and those who walk its edges, the descendants of the old gardeners, the boatmen, the singers, the seed keepers, they still pause, still listen, still learn. The lake was not a textbook, but it was a teacher, one that spoke in ripples, not rules, in reflections, not warnings, and the wisest among them never stopped listening. If the chinampas were the lungs of Tenochtitlan, the canoes were the breath, in and out, back and forth, day after day, always moving, always quiet, not with speed, but with purpose. Every morning, before the sun fully climbed the sky, the canoes pushed away from their banks. Some carried baskets of vegetables, others bundles of herbs, a few priests heading toward a lakeside shrine, and sometimes, just sometimes, a canoe carried nothing but a father and his child, off to learn how to listen to the water. These boats were simple, carved from a single tree trunk, smoothed by hand, no sails, no ornaments, just balance, just wood, and water, and will. Children learned to paddle before they could walk steadily on land. They knew how to step in without tipping, how to feel the shift of weight, how to sense when the current turned, even before they could see it. To them, a canoe wasn't a tool. It was a friend, a guide, a rhythm beneath the body. The Aztecs didn't have wheels. They didn't need them, because the canals were their roads, and the canoes, their carriages, their cots, their cradles. A man might carry flowers to market in the morning, and return by night with news from another village. A mother might take her baby wrapped in cloth, gently rocked to sleep by the paddling of her arms. And in the time of ceremonies, canoes were draped with garlands, painted with natural dyes, transformed into moving altars. There were even canoe songs, soft tunes meant to match the rhythm of paddling, melodies that help long journeys feel shorter, lyrics about fish, about gods, about love found across the water. Sometimes a single voice singing, sometimes just humming, but always gentle, always slow, always in step with the dipping of the oar. At night, canoes were tied gently to posts, or pulled halfway onto the shore. Their hulls rested like sleeping animals, and if you listened carefully, you might hear the drip of lake water from the paddle blade, falling, falling, like a metronome counting the hours. The lake had thousands of canoes, each one different, each one the same. They made no noise, left no trail, but they held a civilization together. Without them, there would be no harvests, no markets, no festivals, no stories passed from one chinampa to the next. Even now, if you visit Xochimilco, you'll see them, modern versions brightly painted, some with music and celebration. But listen closely. Beneath the laughter, beneath the sound of oars, the old rhythm remains. the one that once carried corn and song across a mirror of sky and water. Not every act in a garden is equal. Some moments are routine: weeding, watering, harvesting, all important, all necessary. But once a year, there is a moment that feels different, quieter, older, sacred. It is the planting of the first seed. The Aztecs did not begin this task in a hurry. They did not scatter seeds like wind. They prepared. The first planting of the season was a ceremony. Soft, steady, almost silent. The chinampa was swept clean, not just of weeds, but of old thoughts. Elders would say, if your heart is full of worry, the seed will not know where to grow. So the gardeners began the day with calm. They washed their hands in lake water. They touched their foreheads to the soil, not to worship the ground, but to become part of it. A small altar was built at the edge of the chinampa. Nothing grand, just reeds and flowers. A few painted stones. A bowl of water. A handful of ash. The offerings were simple. Ear of cornmeal to represent nourishment. Herb amaranth for endurance. Cherry blossom petals for beauty and the blessing of color. Each item placed with 2 hands. Each item offered with breath, because even breath was seen as a gift to the gods. Then came the moment. A single seed, held between 2 fingers, not yet planted. First, it was spoken to, not loudly, not in words we'd easily understand, but with the voice that lives below language. The voice that says, I am here. I am ready. I am grateful. Then the hole was dug, just a finger's width, the seed placed inside, and the soil pressed gently on top, like a blanket. No clapping, no psalm, just silence, and maybe the sound of the lake breathing nearby. Afterward, no one walked away quickly. The farmer or priest or elder, whoever planted that first seed, would remain kneeling for a while, watching, waiting, thanking, because that seed wasn't just food. It was beginning. It was memory. It was the chance to try again. Children watched this moment carefully. Some sat cross-legged, wide-eyed. Others clutched small bundles of seeds of their own, eager to follow. But none moved until given permission. Because the first planting taught more than farming. It taught reverence. That life does not begin with action, but with intention. After the seed was planted, and the blessing given, and the altar left behind, only then did the rest of the planting begin. A soft cascade of hands across the chinampa. A quiet rhythm of earth meeting seed. A new year unfolding. Not in days or numbers, but in rows of green, and the promise of growth. And though thousands of seeds would follow, each important, each nurtured, the first would always be remembered, because in that first seed was everything: hope, history, home. The first seed rested underground, covered by warm soil, surrounded by silence, embraced by stillness. But inside, something stirred. Not a voice, not a sound, just a quiet knowing. It is time. Above, the chinampa lay calm. Dew glistened on the leaves of nearby plants. Willow trees whispered in the breeze. And somewhere not far off, a child watched the place where the seed had been planted. He didn't expect a miracle that day. He simply watched, and waited, and believed. Beneath the surface, the seed opened. A root, thin and pale, pressed downward, seeking water. A stem, soft and curved, rose upward, reaching light. It moved slowly, not because it was weak, but because it was wise. It knew everything real takes time. After a few days, a tiny green shoot broke through the soil. Small, delicate, almost invisible. But to the farmer who planted it, it was a sign, a promise kept, a prayer answered, a whisper from the earth. I heard you. The shoot began to grow. Each day, just a little taller. Each day, its color deepened. And around it, others began to rise too. Hundreds of shoots, thousands of quiet lives, stretching toward the same sky, bathed in the same light. The sun gave warmth. The lake gave water. The wind, on some days, leaned down to encourage the stems. And always, someone watched. A woman came each morning to sprinkle water from a clay pot. She whispered a short blessing with every pour. Grow well. Feed many. Come home safe. A child stood beside her, counting the new leaves. He named them after stars. The plant didn't understand the words, but it felt the care. And care, the Aztecs believed, was a language of its own. As weeks passed, the seed became a stalk. Its roots reached deeper, anchoring it against wind. Its leaves grew wider, catching more light. Birds sometimes landed near it. Insects danced above it. The soil wrapped around it like a cradle. And when rain fell, it didn't shiver. It drank. By the time the season's midpoint arrived, the stalk stood tall, strong, steady, full of promise. It swayed gently when the breeze passed, not resisting, just moving with grace, because the plant, like the people who raised it, had learned that strength and softness can live in the same stem. To the outside world, it was just maize, but to the family who planted it, it was something more. A symbol of beginning, a child's first lesson in patience, a mother's faith, a father's offering, a gift from the earth, a small green flame of life. It would not stay forever. One day, it would be harvested, cooked, shared, blessed. But for now, it simply stood, quiet and alive, on a floating garden, in the middle of a sacred lake. The season turned. The winds were softer now. The sun lingered a little longer in the afternoons, and the lake, still and golden, reflected the changing sky, like an old story being gently retold. On the chinampas, the plants stood tall. Maize stalks swayed in the breeze. Beans curled along their stems. Squash vines crept low, broad leaves hiding yellow blossoms and heavy fruit. Everything was ready, but the Aztecs did not rush to harvest. They waited, because this was not just the end of a season. It was a time of gratitude, a moment too sacred to begin without pause. Families gathered early. The chinampa was swept clean, not just of fallen leaves, but of busy thoughts. An altar was built from what the garden had grown. Stalks of maize bound in bundles, fresh chilies tied in strings, flowers tucked into clay jars, a bowl of water, a folded cloth dyed by hand. There was no feast yet, no fire, just the calm breath of the land, and the soft steps of those who had tended it. The elder of the family stepped forward. He did not speak loudly. His words were for the soil, for the sky, for the seed that once rested in silence, and now stood proudly before them. He said, "You gave us green. You gave us gold. You asked for care, and we gave it. Now, with open hands, We receive your gift. Then, with hands that had planted many times before, he reached out and picked the first ear of maize. There was no applause, no cheer, only breath held and released. And the harvest began. Each member of the family took part. Children carried baskets. Mothers picked squash with two hands, never turning their backs to the plants. Fathers cut maize close to the base, placing each stalk down like a sacred bundle. Never tossing, never rushing. Even grandparents, a fable, plucked herbs from between the rows and smiled at the scent they'd known all their lives. The chinampas slowly emptied, but it did not feel bare. It felt full of joy, of memory, of meaning, because every fruit taken had once been a seed placed with care, and now it was returning to hands, to mouths, to the cycle. When the baskets were full, the family sat in the shade, not to eat yet, but to rest, to breathe in the scent of earth, and to whisper once more, "Thank you." Later that evening, in their home built from reeds and clay, they prepared the meal. Nothing fancy, just maize ground into dough, chilies crushed with salt, squash roasted until soft. The first plate was placed before a candle, not to be eaten, but to honor the gods and the spirit of the garden. Then they ate, slowly, together, with stories and soft laughter that drifted out across the lake like smoke. The harvest was not about having, it was about remembering who gave and how gently we must receive. The next day, the chinampa would rest. No planting, no watering, just air and light and silence. Because even the earth, after giving so much, deserved to breathe. Some people build temples with stone. The Aztecs built theirs with soil, not to rise above the world, but to rest inside it, not to escape nature, but to join it, fully, humbly, with bare feet and open hands. The chinampa was not just the garden, it was a quiet philosophy, a way of being, a practice of belonging. To tend a chinampa was to remember that life is not meant to be rushed, that what is planted in patience grows in peace, that nourishment, real nourishment, takes time, not just to create, but to understand. Children raised near the chinampas grew up with a sense of rhythm. They learn that the day doesn't begin with noise, but with listening to the wind, to the water, to the work waiting patiently for warm hands and quiet attention. They learn to speak softly, because the plants, like people, grow better in calm company. And they learn that every action, however small, leaves a mark. To forget to water one day meant withering. To walk carelessly through rows meant breaking stems. To harvest without thanks meant forgetting the gift. The chinampa didn't punish. It simply reflected. What you gave, it gave. What you forgot, it quietly held, until you remembered. Even grown men, warriors and scholars, would return to the chinampa in quiet hours to find something they couldn't name. Not food, not rest, but something deeper. A kind of clarity. A place where things made sense. Not because they were explained, but because they were felt. The floating gardens asked for no worship, only care, only presence, only the willingness to pause long enough to feel the miracle of mud beneath your knees, to know that from the simplest things, water, root, sun, come the sacred. Some say the Aztecs were fierce. Some say they were cruel. But those who lived with the chinampas knew another truth, that their spirit was rooted in balance, in rhythm, in deep respect for the world that gave them life. They bowed before the sun, yes, and before the gods. But just as often, they bowed before a seed, or a stalk of maize, or a single bee, dancing above a blossom, because to them, what grew from the earth was not beneath them, it was within them. They did not see themselves as masters of nature. They saw themselves as participants, as stewards, as listeners, as guests. And in that way, they became something rare in this world. Not owners of land, but companions to it. Not rulers of time, but dancers within it. Not conquerors, but caretakers. The empire is gone now. Tenochtitlan, that floating jewel of stone and green, was broken. Its temples burned. Its canals buried. Its names changed. And yet, the chinampas remain. Not all, not many, but enough. Enough to remember. In a quiet part of modern Mexico City, just beyond the sound of cars and concrete, a place called Xochimilco still breathes. There, the waters move slowly. The birds still nest in reeds. And if you listen, really listen, you'll hear something ancient, moving beneath the surface. Canoes still pass, though now painted in bright colors, carrying visitors, music, even celebrations. But in the early morning, before the city fully wakes, the water still holds its old shape. A gardener steps into a flat-bottomed boat. He paddles through narrow channels, past rows of willow trees, toward his chinampa. He carries a bundle of seedlings. His hands are weathered, his breath steady. He says little. He works slowly. He places each young plant in the soil with care, just as his ancestors did, just as someone will again. The city may not notice. The headlines won't record it. But somewhere, deep in the mud, beneath the roots, in the pulse of that still water, the memory remains. Not a memory of war, or conquest, or crowns, but of care, of rhythm, of a people who once fed themselves with floating gardens, not only with hands, but with hearts. And perhaps that is what we've lost. And perhaps that is what we can find again, not by rebuilding an empire, but by remembering a way of living, a way of listening, that honored the soil, and gave thanks with every breath. You don't need to live on a lake. You don't need a chinampa. You don't even need a garden. All you need is a moment, to pause, to look at something growing, to remember that it was once a seed, and to feel, for just a breath, the stillness that once filled an entire city built on water. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, and the world around you softens, carry this with you. A boat drifting on a quiet canal, a stalk of maize swaying in the breeze, a handful of earth held gently between two palms, and the voice of someone long ago, whispering into the wind. Thank you for growing. Thank you for feeding. Thank you for staying. And now I ask, as we bring this journey to a close, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Because even though we are far apart, I know one thing. You, me, and thousands of others around the world, we all share one quiet desire: to fall asleep, to a voice that honors stillness, and stories that drift like water. Thank you for floating with me, before you drift off completely. If this story brought you a little peace, a little calm, or simply helped your mind settle for the night, green circle, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us grow slowly, gently, like a garden, and you'll never miss the next quiet story waiting just beyond the shore. Yellow circle if you'd like more people to find this calm corner of the internet. Feel free to like the video, share it with someone who could use a little stillness, and leave a comment below. Just tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I'd love to know how far this quiet canoe has traveled. Crescent Moon, thank you for being here, for breathing slow, and for making space in your day to float with me through history, through memory, through sleep. Good night, and I'll see you in the next story.